Today, we're going to look at the 5 things that you can do to improve your sound. Now, there aren't many here, so let's jump right in. The first one is room acoustics. This one has always bothered me. And unless you have a dedicated listening room, you have to work with what you have. And I did for years. And I lived with it until Mandy decided one day to convert one of our rooms, and that's the room I'm sitting in right here, to convert it into a vinyl record listening room. It opened up a bunch of possibilities. We added carpet, we painted the walls, which were for ambiance, not acoustics, and we added heavier curtains to cut down on room reflections. A few months after that, she let me hang a pair of thick curtains behind the listening positions on the back wall. And this also helps with reflections, as long as I promised to open them when the room wasn't in use. But you don't need a dedicated room to take room acoustics into account. I mean, look at small things like, maybe rugs, or I mentioned curtains already. Anything that you can do to the room, little tweaks to kind of fine tune the way that the room will sound. And again, it can be very simple little tweaks. I mean, little adjustments will make a big difference. And just knowing that there are reflective surfaces really helps too. I mean, you can help alleviate some of that. I don't know if you can see over behind me here, but we have a ladder with some, kind of like throw blankets over it. And that also does help cut down on some of the reflections. It doesn't fully absorb them or diffuse them, but it certainly helps. And I did not want to spend money on, expensive acoustic panels and things like that. At least not yet. Maybe someday, I'll save up and do that, but you don't need to. Just be aware of the little things you can do to improve the sound. And while I was talking about little tweaks, here's another one: speaker placement. You probably knew this one was coming, and it is worth emphasizing. If you have the ability, to move them around, even in small ways, it will make a big difference. Placing speakers too high or too low relative to, the listener's ears, obstructing them with furniture even, or maybe positioning them too close together, can all negatively affect the things like soundstage and imaging and overall balance of the music. And I admittedly obsess over speaker tweaks and speaker placement, so much so that I always have this measuring tape sitting right over there. And if I ever do make a tweak, I measure it and I mark it down in a notepad that I keep at the ready to make sure that the speakers where they're placed are recorded in case they get moved, and I can make sure they go back to the same spot. I'm a little nuts. It does get borderline ridiculous because I'm always changing the measurements. My big thing has always been keeping things centered, having that invisible center speaker, and trying to achieve a wider soundstage. And I do have challenges. This room isn't a big room, so I have to get creative, and I've managed to do so, but I'm sure there's still things I can do, and I still obsess over them. So what can you do, and what things can you try? A good starting point is to position your speakers and listening position in an equilateral triangle. And this helps create a balanced soundstage and ensures that both speakers reach your ears at the same time. Also, play with toe-in. Adjust the angle at which your speakers point inwards towards your listening position. This can affect the focus of that invisible center speaker, and also the soundstage and the clarity of individual instruments. I have my KLH Model 5s pointed at my shoulders. My left one's about right here, the other one's about right here, and just slightly, maybe an inch or two away from my shoulders. Ideally, the tweeters should be at ear level when you're seated in your listening position. And another thing to do is to see what the manufacturer recommends. Some don't really do a whole lot for, advice on speaker placement, but when they do, it can be a gold mine. The folks at KLH have great starting advice in their manual. And surprisingly enough, after all the tweaks I did with my speakers, all the placement, all the obsessing, all the measuring, all the toe in, sometimes toe out, all the things I've tried, what I've landed on is pretty much exactly what KLH recommended in their manual. Sometimes I have to take the long way to get to where I'm going. The next one I almost didn't include because it is a rabbit hole, and I didn't want to, to say anything that would cause someone to feel like they need to run out and spend some money, because that is not the point. Actually, the whole point of this video is doing things so you improve your sound in the process. Matching components. At its most basic, what I'm talking about is making sure that your amplifier has enough power to drive your speakers. Matching amplifier output to your speaker's impedance and sensitivity is crucial. An underpowered amplifier that struggles can lead to a lot of problems. If it's a weak amplifier, and you're trying to, get some volume out of that with low sensitive speakers, and the amplifier happens to be weak, it can drive it to distortion and lead to damage. I had this concern with my Model 5s. They being KLH, recommends an amplifier that can put out from anywhere from 20 watts to 200 watts to drive those speakers. Fortunately, my amp from Eric Audio has a lot of options depending on the tubes. And if I'm running it in triode or say ultralinear mode, the ultralinear mode actually puts out more power. At its lowest, that amp will push out about 20 watts if I have EL34s in place. And that's in triode mode. If I put it in ultralinear, I can get to about 35 watts. Now, I can also toss in these KT150s, these tongue cell KT150s. These are beasts. And I think it will push that amp in ultralinear mode up to 65 watts. It doesn't hurt to do a bit of research. If you're into tubes and your tube amp can accept different types of tubes, always check with your manufacturer, check the manual to see what you can do. If you can go from EL34s all the way up to KT150s, you do have some options there. If not, just know that there is a concern with matching components. If things sound great to you, fine. Just trust your ears. Don't go crazy or obsess over it or worry about it. When I was younger, specs and numbers were like Egyptian hieroglyphics. I didn't want to go there. I would just throw any old pieces of equipment together, and it always sounded fine to me. And here's one you may not have considered: volume, cranking up the volume. And we've all, I'm sure, done this at one time or another, cranking up the volume because you want to get a little bit more detail out of the sound that you're hearing. Instead of reaching for the volume knob, try to identify the root cause of what you might be missing. And to avoid this, I usually listen at moderate levels, maybe around 75 decibels. Sometimes they'll push it up to 80, but it's usually around 75. Every record pressing is different, and some are actually mastered to sound a bit louder than others, a little bit more dynamic too. The band Ghost is a great example. They tend, at least their earlier albums, tend to master at low levels. So I really have to adjust for that. Find a comfortable level that allows you to enjoy the music. If you start to hear distortion or things don't sound right, it's okay to reduce the volume a bit. This next one I love. And I also get comments that I am also guilty of perpetuating some of these. And what I'm talking about is audio myths. The world of hi-fi is rife with misconceptions and myths that lead to people spending money that they don't need to spend. Things like, and I'm going to get some pushback on this, so bear with me, gold connectors. They're not, quote unquote, the gold standard. I mean, yes, they're still going to sound great, but you don't need to seek them out, and they're not necessarily going to improve the sound of your system. You also don't need expensive cables. I've talked about expensive cables before. The ones I have in my system happen to be very expensive cables, but that's only a recent development. I did not always have these cables, and I was always happy with the sound. I got a slight bump in improvement, and I got a good deal on these cables. They're expensive, but I'm not saying you need them. If you want to save your money and get them someday, fine, go ahead. But don't feel like expensive cables or gold connectors or a lot of the other things and claims you'll hear, don't feel like you need to spend a lot of money on cables. Cables that are $50 or less, even $25, are going to sound great in your system. Now, I'm happy to say that these are probably the last set of cables I'll ever buy. I'm actually thinking about making a video on audio myths. It's going to turn into a battle, and I can only imagine the heat I'll get from it. It would be fun. Why not ruffle some feathers? Actually, I will. Here's another audio myth that I'm going to mention. This is a good example. WD-40 to clean your records. I don't know who came up with that, and I have had commenters say that they swear by WD-40 reducing static and also improving soundstage and all that. Maybe? I don't get it. I'm not about to spray a record that I like with WD-40 and let my stylus run through that junk. But if you do and you get great sound, all the more power to you. I just hope that after you do it, you give it a rinse with distilled water. I'm just thinking of your stylus. Just be critical of claims. Don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe everything that I say. I learn all the time, and I change my opinion sometimes if new evidence is presented that challenge what I used to believe. So just go to sources that you trust. If there's somebody that you trust to lead you in the right direction, ask them questions and just do your research. Ultimately, the best judge of a hi-fi system is you and your ears. If you don't hear a difference, fine, move on. And don't take my word for any of this seriously. I'm only here to offer my advice as I learn, and I'm always learning. I'm learning from the comments, I'm learning from people who reach out, I'm learning from watching other YouTube videos that are in the same niche that I am. I learn from people constantly. It's wonderful. So again, just seek out sources that you trust. Let's go with one more. Give components playtime. Some audio components, especially things like speakers and amplifiers, require what's known as burn-in time. Some people say that that's another one of those myths, but it is true, and you will hear the difference with some components. They require time to settle in. As it gets played, as they heat up, and they'll relax. They'll actually get to the sound that is expected from them after the burn-in period has passed. And things like capacitors and tubes and cartridges, all of these things require some burn-in time and time to settle in, to shake off that stiffness that comes out of being newly manufactured. And simply put, don't judge a component as it sounds right out of the box. Give it some time. Something that might not sound perfect to you 10 hours later could actually sound wonderful. Great example is something I recently went through is I have some KT88s in my system right now, the PS Vane Horizon KT88s. I wanted to give them another shot because the first time I listened to them, the KT88s, mind you, the EL34s were wonderful. The KT88s, at first I thought were a little bit too clinical, weren't warm enough for me. Gave them some more time, popped them in, gave them, I think, another 20, 30 hours, and they are beautiful, tonally beautiful, very smooth. The treble is rolled off. Mid-range and bass sound great, and it's all because I gave them time to settle in. They are wonderful sounding tubes. And that's about it. If you found this information helpful in any way, shape, or form, please like and subscribe. I also have a newsletter. It's free to join. I'll leave a link in the description to get to it. It comes out weekly, and again, it's free. So, as always, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And until next time, take care of yourself and enjoy your records. I'll see you soon.